the Congo Free State atrocities. In the late 19th century, as European powers carved up the African continent during the so-called Scramble for Africa, one territory stood out not as a national colony, but as a massive private estate. The Congo Free State, covering a vast area of Central Africa, became the personal fiefdom of King Leopold II of Belgium. Under the guise of a grand philanthropic and civilizing mission, Leopold established a regime of unprecedented brutality. The atrocities committed in the Congo Free State between 1885 and 1908 represent one of the darkest chapters in human history, characterized by forced labor, systematic mutilation, and the death of millions of Congolese people. Leopold's acquisition of the Congo was a masterpiece of diplomatic deception. At the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, European nations recognized Leopold's claim to the Congo Basin based on his promises to suppress the East African slave trade, promote humanitarian policies, and guarantee free trade within the colony. Operating through a front organization called the International Association of the Congo, Leopold convinced the world that his interests were purely altruistic. However, once his sovereignty was recognized, the promises of free trade and philanthropy were swiftly abandoned in favor of ruthless exploitation. Unlike other colonies governed by European states, the Congo Free State was the personal property of King Leopold II. He ruled it from Europe, never once setting foot in the territory himself. To enforce his will over a region roughly 76 times the size of Belgium, Leopold established a private army and police force known as the Force Publique. Composed of European officers and conscripted African soldiers, the Force Publique became the brutal instrument through which Leopold extracted wealth from the land and its people. Initially, the economic exploitation of the Congo focused on ivory, which was highly prized in Europe for piano keys, billiard balls, and ornaments. However, the economic landscape shifted dramatically in the 1890s with John Boyd Dunlop's invention of the inflatable pneumatic tire. This triggered a massive global demand for rubber for bicycles and the burgeoning automobile industry. The Congo Basin was rich in wild rubber vines, providing Leopold with an incredibly lucrative monopoly just as global demand skyrocketed. To maximize profits, Leopold's administration instituted a draconian quota system for rubber extraction. Entire villages were assigned exorbitant quotas of wild rubber that they were required to deliver to state agents. Harvesting wild rubber was an arduous and dangerous task. Workers had to trek deep into the jungle, climb trees to tap the vines, and often coat their own bodies in the sticky latex so it could dry and be peeled off. The quotas were impossibly high, leaving the Congolese with little time to tend to their own survival needs. The enforcement of these rubber quotas relied on a system of state-sanctioned terror. When a village failed to meet its quota, agents of the Force Publique would employ horrific punitive measures. A common tactic was the hostage system. Soldiers would enter a village and abduct the women and children, holding them in squalid conditions until the men returned from the forest with the required amount of rubber. Many hostages died of starvation or disease while in captivity. The relentless demand for rubber disrupted the traditional agricultural cycle of the Congolese people. Because the men were forced into the jungle for weeks at a time to harvest rubber, and the women were often held hostage or fleeing from the military, crops went unplanted and untended. This widespread neglect of agriculture resulted in devastating famines that swept through the region, claiming the lives of countless individuals who were already weakened by exhaustion and abuse. Perhaps the most infamous and grotesque symbol of Leopold's rule was the systematic practice of bodily mutilation, specifically the severing of hands. The administration required Force Publique soldiers to justify every bullet they fired, as ammunition was expensive and the state feared soldiers were wasting it on hunting or mutiny. To prove a bullet had been used to kill a rebel or a worker who refused to harvest rubber, soldiers were ordered to return with the severed right hand of the victim. This morbid accounting system quickly devolved into widespread, indiscriminate atrocity. Soldiers who had wasted bullets or who simply wanted to fulfill their quota of severed hands without engaging in combat would amputate the hands of living men, women, and even children. Baskets of severed hands became a gruesome currency in the Congo Free State, presented to European officers as proof of a village's punishment or a soldier's compliance. The psychological terror inflicted by this practice was absolute, cementing a culture of profound dread. The human toll of King Leopold's greed was staggering. While precise demographic records do not exist, historians estimate that the population of the Congo dropped by approximately half during the period of the Free State. This equates to the deaths of an estimated 10 million Congolese people. They died from outright murder, starvation caused by the destruction of their agricultural systems, exhaustion from forced labor, and the rapid spread of diseases introduced by Europeans or exacerbated by malnutrition and displacement. Despite Leopold's efforts to maintain a monopoly on information leaving the Congo, the horrors eventually leaked out. One of the first whistleblowers was George Washington Williams, an African-American historian and journalist who traveled to the Congo in 1890. Expecting to see a model of African development, Williams was horrified by the cruelty he witnessed. He published an open letter to King Leopold II detailing the crimes against humanity, including the widespread use of forced labor and the routine murder of Congolese citizens. Williams's early warnings were largely ignored, but by the turn of the century, a sustained international outcry began to form. Edmond Denis Morel, a shipping clerk in Liverpool, noticed that ships arriving from the Congo were heavily laden with valuable rubber and ivory, but ships departing for the Congo carried mostly guns and ammunition. Deducing that the trade was actually a system of forced labor, Morel launched a relentless journalistic campaign. His efforts were corroborated by the 1904 Casement Report, a devastating official investigation authored by British diplomat Roger Casement, which provided undeniable proof of the atrocities. Together, Morel and Casement founded the Congo Reform Association, which became one of the first major international human rights movements of the 20th century. The movement successfully mobilized public opinion across Europe and the United States. Prominent literary figures lent their voices to the cause, including Mark Twain, who penned the blistering political satire King Leopold's Soliloquy, and Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote The Crime of the Congo. Photos of Congolese people with severed hands circulated widely, shattering Leopold's philanthropic facade. The intense international pressure eventually became too much for King Leopold II to withstand. Under the weight of global condemnation and pressure from his own government, Leopold was forced to relinquish his personal control over the territory. In 1908, the Belgian parliament annexed the Congo Free State, renaming it the Belgian Congo. While the transition brought an end to the worst systemic excesses of the rubber terror, the region remained a colony heavily exploited for its resources until it gained independence in 1960. The legacy of the Congo Free State is one of unimaginable cruelty driven by unchecked colonial greed. King Leopold II never faced a trial for the millions of lives destroyed under his command, and he died a wealthy man shortly after ceding the territory. However, the history of his regime stands as a chilling testament to the capacity for human atrocities when power is wielded without accountability. The scars left by the forced labor, the mutilations, and the decimation of the population profoundly shaped the trajectory of the Congo, leaving a tragic legacy that continues to resonate in the region today.